Teachers, what's the worst parent-teacher conference you've ever had? I had a student fail my class and I thought I'd been emailing with their parents throughout the semester. Turns out the parents didn't speak English and relied on their children to translate for them. Their older sibling was studying abroad, so the student was able to hide everything from the parents. Once they came home, the jig was up. The parents couldn't believe their child had lied for months, so we had a face-to-face meeting. It was so awful to see their faces crumble in shame and humiliation as their oldest child translated the meeting. I teach 7th grade, and the one that stands out to me was from my second year in the classroom. Probably it sticks out in my mind because I didn't feel confident in my job yet, so this interaction I had with the family threw me for a loop. Once, I had a struggling student come in with their family, and I was so eager to talk to this family. I was hoping that we could have some kind of constructive conversation that would lead to the kid's improvement in my class. I'd pulled up their grades to explain why he had a D in my class and what he needed to work on to bring his grade up. Next thing I knew, parents started completely berating the kid, calling him stupid and lazy and telling him that he was a failure. It was horrible. Even worse, the kid was on the spectrum, so he really didn't have the kind of emotional stability to handle something like that. Heck, I don't know what 7th grader would be able to handle something like that. He started crying and his parents apologized to me, and led him out into the hallway where they continued to berate him. It was rough. I tried to smooth some things over by talking about the kid's strengths, but they just wouldn't be deterred. The kid was sitting on the ground in the hallway just sobbing next to the lockers, and his parents left, presumably to go to conferences with more teachers. I tried to console the student, but I don't think there was much I could have done. He was just completely heartbroken. I had to tell a well-known gang leader that his son was failing my class. It actually went better than expected, but the anticipation was real. I was talking to the parent of a kindergarten student and telling her ways that she could help her child at home. She suddenly said, "Do you get paid to do this?" I said, yeah. And she said, "Well, I don't." Then she swiped all the papers off the table, stood up and walked out. I was like, okay then. My best friend's mum was told by her kindergarten or reception teacher in the UK to stop helping or encouraging her to read as she was making the other kids look bad, when in fact it was the teacher being a bit crap. She changed schools not long after. Why on earth an educator feels the need to stop a child from learning and excelling is a question that will never not boggle my mind. Not quite a parent-teacher conference, but it was after I got my first cell flip phone long ago when they were just coming out. An 8th grader stole it. My wife called the phone and the guy who answered was dumb enough to give her his name. It was a parent who was using it. The kid confesses to taking it and the parents came in. Admin confronted the parents about it, explaining that we just wanted the phone back. The parents tore into the kid for confessing he took the phone and told him his birthday was cancelled for ratting on them. I've had similar to this. Lady at my work, her phone goes missing. She then, months later, does a home visit to a family and sees her phone on the table. She picks it up and her photos are still on there. She says to the mum, "This is my phone." And mum says, "Oh my god, sorry, if I'd known it was yours, I would have made him give it back." How the frick does your 8-year-old just come home with a stolen phone and you're cool with it unless it's been swiped off someone you like? I did like the kid though, just couldn't trust him. My mother-in-law is a teacher. She had one child who basically existed to make sure my mother-in-law wouldn't be able to get through her day peacefully. Crawling on the ground all day, continuously talking, just generally distracting other kids and being uncontrollable. Mother-in-law had several talks with the kids' parents, but they obviously couldn't give a single crap. One day she lost her phone that she always kept on top of her desk. She spent hours looking for it when it occurred to her that the kid had been unusually quiet toward the end of the day. She asked my father-in-law to call her and of course the kid picks it up. My mother-in-law was furious and called the girl's parents. Her parents said that the kid had claimed that mother-in-law had let her have it for good behavior. It was all really stupid. Parent was irate because I caught her 6th grader cheating on a test. The parents said that the daughter was too stupid to cheat anyway and kept calling her dumb and an idiot. The daughter was right next to her, hearing her mother talk all this negative crap about her. Absolutely broke my heart. In tears, I told my principal. She said, "Well, there's nothing you can do about it, and if she really believes that, she's doing an incredible disservice to her daughter." I left the school the end of that year. An unintended conference when an undergrad I was teaching requested a formal meeting with me, her mother, and the dean of the college at the university. She'd received a 97% on an essay and she and her mother were both in tears, demanding that I be reprimanded and retrained for unfair grading policies. I think my mouth was agape the entire time. One time, a child peed all over the bathroom in the school. When we brought it up with a parent, they demanded to know why we didn't teach them how to properly use the bathroom. My girlfriend's mum is a teacher in a very poor, mostly racial minority area. She once had a child in 3rd grade who was on the cusp of being tested for special needs, but basically was approached as being slow but no serious biological developmental issues. This child, on one disgusting occasion, ate his own feces. Yes, ingested, on purpose, his own excrement. When brought up to the mother, the response was, "Well, he was hungry." An administrator in the room responded, "Then send him home with some crackers." Ugh, the horror. Once had a phone conference with a parent who accused me of forcing students to come to my house and build a garage for me. The parent said his son was being ostracized and punished by me for refusing to come to my house and work on my garage. The only thing I could do was laugh at him. I thought it was a prank and hung up on him. Next morning, I had to meet with my principal because the parent had called and threatened to call the local news media about my classroom if I wasn't immediately fired. The parent left screaming rants on my principal's voicemail. We listened to it a few times and got some good laughs. The parent claimed I was making the kid drive to my house during class, and if they didn't, I was failing them. But his son had an A- in the class, and the drive to my house was longer than the class period. The parent was obviously nuts, but it had to be treated as credible. So there was an investigation, and there may even be a report about it in my personal file. I've had other weird interactions with parents, but that one definitely takes the cake. Most parents are awesome and I enjoy visiting them. A very small minority will try and verbally abuse you or bully you. Kids will twist words and incidents so they don't get into trouble. Some parents can't believe their angels can do anything wrong. I don't know why they believe that. I've messed up as a kid and as a young adult. My kid is no angel either. That's not to say that teachers don't mess up and twist things either. Former teacher, first parent-teacher conference. I put a lot of time into preparing this evening as an innocent 22-year-old. I gave a 10-minute speech to about 15 family members. They didn't seem to care at all. Then I met up with each individually and they were combative. Some stunk of alcohol. One straight up yelled at me for my grading systems. It was basically the beginning of the end of my interest in teaching. Depending on what kind of training you had to go through to become a teacher in the first place, that seems like a raw deal. Hopefully it wasn't the 3 to 5 years of training that most people do. So this year I got thrown into a new teaching assignment. In year 2, the week before school started, I teach geometry, which many students hate because it requires a different type of thinking. It's almost worse with honors students because they think they should automatically know everything without trying and are shocked when they don't. Anyway, one of my geometry classes basically tried to stage a mutiny because of a test before conferences. The principal informed me that she was getting emails about the class. I was prepared for the worst and then surprised when most of my conferences were very positive, until one couple sat down and said that their students weren't learning any geometry. I explained that they were constantly distracted in class and that I was giving them new seat assignments to help them focus. Because on the day of conferences, the student in question had spent the entire class period drawing a clown when I thought she was taking notes. The mum said, "That was one incident. It doesn't explain the fact that she's not learning. Plus, is it true that you once forgot to post the answer key to a review guide and then gave the quiz the next day anyway?" She says this like it's the most damning piece of evidence in a courtroom drama. Me? Yes, it did happen once. We'd gone over the majority of the answers in class the day before. I told the students that they had time to ask questions before the quiz and that should this ever happen again, all they need to do is send an email or leave an online comment and I'll fix it right away. It shouldn't have affected their grade at all, and even if it had, I allow test retakes and am always available after school to help. Cue the awkward silence while the mum stares at me like an angry bullfrog, presumably shocked that I didn't resign on the spot. This was the biggest flaw they could come up with in my class. I have a crazy professional and personal life and am doing my best, but kids, and often parents, will find any possible excuse to avoid confronting their struggles. I ended up chuckling with my principal about the fact that my failing to upload a document triggered parent emails to the administration after the fact when not a single parent or student bothered to contact me the day of. These are from the same parent evening. 1. Parents of a student with a name fancy enough that they may as well have been called Lord and Lady Ashcroft. They greet me with, "It's a pleasure to meet you. You aren't a C-word like all the other teachers." In very proper English. I was gobsmacked. Spoke to a colleague later who said, "Did you speak to those parents? They just sat me down, called me a C-word and left." 2. I had a student who was great at the work but swore to an extent that would make a trooper blush. "Hi, how are you doing today?" for instance, would come out as, "Frickin' hi! Fricking how the frick are you fricking doing, you fricking gobcrap?" Suffice to say, I brought this up with his mother, who turned to him and said, "You fricking what? Fricking heck! We fricking talked about this, you fricking eggplant." I stopped policing his language after that. There wasn't any fricking point. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. I mean, it wasn't exactly a bad conference, but one time the mother of a 6-year-old second grader was pushing for her son to skip second grade and go to third grade. I tried pointing out that even though his reading and math skills were excellent, advancing him further would create a gap in his knowledge about science and social studies. Not to mention the fact that he's very immature and socially sticks out. Finally, I turned to both the mother and father and asked when he's a 15-year-old senior in high school what 18-year-old woman is going to want to go to the prom with him. Then Dad was like, "Hold up. I'm a school psychologist, not a teacher, but we still have lots of parenting conferences. Worst one, spent a good half hour explaining that I was diagnosing her son with autism and why. Everyone agrees, including the parent, and we move on to developing his IEP. 20 minutes into this, and we're talking about his behavior plan, and she asks me, "I'm wondering, do you think he might have autism?" I do want to say that 98% of parents I work with are kind to school staff and very invested in their children. The stories in this conversation are the exceptions and not the norm. One of my friends just moved from the 4th grade special ed to the 1st grade. The kids are smaller, cuter, and can't draw blood or bruise her as much, which is a plus. The drawback that she's just now realizing is the parents. Older kids' parents have gotten used to the fact that their kid isn't normal and needs extra attention. Parents of the really young kids are still in the denial stage. Half of them still can't accept that their kids should be in special ed and are constantly fighting to get them out. The one where a parent told me it was unreasonable to expect my sophomore US history students to write a 5-paragraph essay. She claimed she had expertise as she used to be an English teacher. Honestly though, I've been very lucky in my career to have never had a seriously bad parent-teacher conference. In my sophomore history class, we had several essays, maybe 3 to 4 a semester. It's wild that she, as an English teacher, would say that was weird. Yep, when she made her claim, it was all I could do to not say, "I see why you used to be an English teacher." This is the same conference where she asked, "Isn't this your first year teaching?" It wasn't. Generally speaking, the parents who see their children as an extension of themselves are the worst to conference with. The parents feel personally attacked when their child has a minor setback and can't imagine their child being anything less than they are. These people are like the worst exaggeration of game players who interpret failure as a personal attack. No, I'm not targeting you, Trevor. You rolled a 4 on the dice when you needed a 12. I had a parent-teacher conference where I basically got called a racist. The father was like, "Can't you see my son isn't like other kids? Give him the benefit of the doubt," heavily indicating his race. This was after his son cheated on a test. The best part was the father was vice principal at another school, but his son went to our expensive private school because he didn't want him in the public school he worked at. The kid eventually confessed, and to be 100% transparent, my school is incredibly diverse. He was far from the only kid there who was his race. Admin was super supportive. They ended up fudging his grade to please the parents after I gave him the 0. They wanted me to do it, but I refused. I told admin they can do whatever they want with the gradebook, but I'm not touching it. I had an experience like that once, was teaching at the majority-minority school where the staff wasn't as representative, only 40% minority teachers. As a result, it was a frequent and not always unwarranted occurrence for a teacher to get labeled as a racist, or at the very least, not treating students equally. I was sitting in a meeting between parents and all of the students' teachers, as well as the principal, to discuss gross behavior concerns we were having with this child. Being really inappropriate with peers, violent outbursts, etc. Parents claimed it was all because of his racist math teacher. The entire time, student is talking in Amharic to his parents and not responding to any English questions we pose. This goes on for about 30 minutes until our math teacher speaks up in what I was later told was perfect Amharic, explaining the situation to the child's parents in their native language. Turns out our white math teacher was a South African orphan that ended up raised in Ethiopia and went to school in the same town as the child's father, albeit 15 years earlier. This whole chain of events pretty much stunned the parents silent, and the meeting wrapped up a few short minutes later. When asked about what he'd said, the teacher told us that he'd reminded the parents that were their son still in Ethiopia, he would have been hauled in front of the school at lunchtime and paddled in front of his entire class for what he'd done, that a bell would have been rung 50 times, once for each time he was paddled, just as he, as well as the kid's parents, had no doubt experienced as a child, and that the child was lucky they were in a part of the world that had gotten rid of such practices. But their child's behavior was utterly inexcusable, and how dare they suggest that the color of their skin somehow makes it okay for their child to disrespect women and commit violence. Unfortunately, it had little effect, and 3 years later the student was in jail for selling substances to minors, less than 6 months after being expelled for intentionally starting a fire in the art room. I was a first-year special education teacher last year. I had little support that year and learned as I went, but especially since I was dealing with health problems at the same time, it wasn't a great year for me or the students. I should add that the majority of my students were bilingual, English and Spanish, and many of the parents didn't speak English at all. My Spanish is advanced beginner at best, so I became well acquainted with a few of the interpreters that worked in translation. There are a few that stick out in my mind. The worst was when the interpreter was a no-show during an ARD meeting. AP requested that I reschedule the meeting. The parent was understanding, but I was so stressed out and embarrassed that the parent came all the way to the school just for the meeting to not happen at all, with the due date for that child's ARD soon approaching. Once everyone had left the room and was out of earshot, I broke down crying. Second to that meeting with a parent who was scared to death that her child had autism. I worked with him more throughout the first semester, and I did begin to notice some possible and very subtle signs of autism, but he didn't have behavioral problems aside from needing regular redirection, and he got along well with his peers, so I wasn't too worried about him from a social standpoint. Academically, he was struggling, but we were working on that. The parent was in tears, and nothing I said could calm her down. What made this especially uncomfortable for me was that I'd been finally diagnosed with autism not even a year prior after suspecting for so long in my life. I wanted so much to assure her that even if her son did have autism, it wasn't the end of the world. It didn't change who he was as a person, but I wasn't exactly sure how. The last one was where the parent ended up being a no-show for an ARD. Mum was apparently pregnant and ended up going to the hospital, which I can understand, but no one could get in touch with any relative to find out what was going on until after the scheduled time. This particular parent had a history of being rather uncaring. The daughter was having some major behavioral issues, ended up getting suspended twice that year, and when her general educational teachers talked to Mum after school, her response was, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" I had a student as a sophomore in a co-teach special ed class. The student was borderline ID, he passed the heavily modified class. Students with these types of educational accommodations and modifications aren't able to attend a 4-year university. They can attend community colleges. The next year he was in my class again. I contacted his case manager and the parents told her they wanted to put him in regular classes so that he would be eligible to attend a 4-year university. We documented his work and scheduled a parent conference. We politely told the parent that their son was bombing the class because he was out of his depth, and we wanted to do the right thing and move him into co-teach classes where he could be successful. The parents argued with us that he was doing well in his other classes. He was passing with a 70 in every one. This is because his teachers didn't want to crush the kid, and grade protected him. His parents continued with, "We both are college graduates and our son will be too." This was ego. We want to provide the student with the proper levels of support. Finally, I was exasperated and called the student in. We spent 2 weeks on Islam and religion, so I asked the student to define Islam. The response was, "An island in the Pacific." Yeah, they still argued with us. Heck, I'd have given him a partial credit for the Arabian Sea, the Persian Gulf, or any other body of water in that region. We eventually got him in the right classes and he graduated with his class. Teachers want what's best for your child because they're our students and we want them to succeed. That's true. I remember having a teacher who did not like me and I did not like them, and I downright hated their subject. But damn, they persisted. Kept me in after class and I probably wouldn't have passed math without them. Most of them want what's best for your kids, guys. Parent accused me of singling out her child, talking to them differently versus the other 25 kids, sitting around and doing bugger all except talking about my romantic life, plus more wild, hurtful accusations. Also accused me of trying to be friends with students, all of which couldn't be further from the truth. I pointed out that I have a TA with me who could dispute those claims. Also legal documents backing up how her child was lying, documenting all the inappropriate behavior and harassment her child had directed at me, with times and dates. The parent continued to reiterate that she believed I was a liar and tore verbal shreds off me for almost 2 hours, no matter how much I repeatedly defended myself. I've never felt so disrespected and belittled my entire life. I was teaching 8th grade. I called a parent due to having their child repeatedly disrupt my class. I don't like to kick students out because to me that means that they've won. They aren't learning anything if they aren't in my room. I also operate on the idea that even if they're tuning me out, they may read one of my posters and retain something. Anyway, I called a parent explaining that their child was disruptive, blurting out, passing notes, moving to different seats, texting, saying rude things, etc. And the parent said, "I bet my child isn't the only one." I responded, "You're right, but I'm talking to you about your child, not someone else's. Isn't it your job to correct their classroom behavior?" I responded, "I've explained the steps I've taken to support your child in the classroom. What do you want me to do about it?" I responded, "Well, I'm not old enough to be your child's parent, so I would appreciate parental support." This is what I said instead of, "Parent your fricking child." There was one kid in one of my classes who had seizure disorder. So one day we had a guest in the room and he wasn't doing any of his work. Then when she asked why, he said, "I have seizure disorder, so I don't have to do any work." They then told me, the student teacher, and then I told my mentor teacher. His family and I had a parent-teacher conference already scheduled that day, so when I brought it up, the dad goes, "My son didn't say that, the guest was making that up." Yes, the guest came into the room, figured out that your kid had seizure disorder, and then told me your kid said that just for fun. Okay. Probably the time when both the dad and the son were high as frick. Both were nodding off in the meeting. The mother looked like she was on the verge of tears. Poor kid never stood a chance. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.